Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight for our event with Signe Pike, the author of The Lost Queen, The Forgotten Kingdom, and her memoir, Fairy Tale. Signe was born in Ithaca, New York, and graduated from Cornell University with her Bachelor of Science in Communication. She worked as an acquisitions editor at Random House and then Penguin before leaving to write her first book, Fairy Tale, One Woman's Search for Enchantment in a Modern World. Pike has spent the past 10 years researching and writing about Celtic history, myth, folklore, and tradition. Her love of history, the great outdoors, early medieval and ancient archaeology, and her dedication to historical accuracy has made her social media feeds an informative delight to her readers, which I can personally attest to. Signe teaches seminars and workshops internationally on writing and publishing, as well as on folklore and tradition. Her writing has been published by Salon, Charleston City Paper, Book Riot, and NPR.org. Signe, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It's so great to be here in my own house, talking to you, though.
In multiple states apart. You know, that is one of the cool things about doing these events now is we can bring people together from all over.
Yeah, and you know what's great about Pennsylvania is that I feel like it's almost my home state because it's right next to Ithaca, New York. So I do feel like I'm sort of hometowning it tonight with everyone, which I love.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
So I figured, can you start off by telling us a bit about the series and why you decided to use the Arthur Merlin legend as your jumping off point?
So the series really just started because I discovered Langorith, the historical 6th century queen, and probably would have just still written a trilogy about Langorith if she had nothing whatsoever to do with Arthur and Merlin because of the fact that her life was so incredible. And she lived through, some of the first religious political wars that Scotland had seen in a very long time, the Anglo-Saxon invasion, for lack of a better term, and the personal events like the Battle of Arderith, which really looms large in my books. So that alone, and then sort of the icing on the cake was this idea that, hey, this guy Merlin is a wizard and he's been totally fictionalized, but guess what? He was very likely based on a real human being. And I just thought it was such a travesty that both of them had been relegated to the land of fiction and fantasy when they were real human beings who'd had such incredible experiences during their times. And that's why they were remembered, because of their lifetimes and what they did. So I think that it's sort of ironic in a way that Merlin's now been turned into a mage and a wizard and represented by so many actors over time. And I feel like it's very saddening to think about Lailoken, the man who very likely inspired that legend and what he was like. And I think he must have been a very charismatic and a very powerful and important person. So that's what I'm trying to resurrect in these books.
Oh, for sure. It looks like we have an inquiry as to whether or not this will be spoilery. We're going to do our absolute darndest not to spoil anything. I even didn't use names or even genders in one of the questions about the second book. So we should be relatively spoiler free as best we can.
I'll do my best. See, I can get into trouble because of the history aspect. And I'm just like, well, you guys could read this in a history book. And guess what? It's 1,500 years later. They're all dead now. Isn't that horrible and sad? That's my life, writing about dead people. I know. I get so emotionally attached. But I'll do my best. Yes, I will try not. And no spoilers. Got it.
So when people ask me at the store if they should read The Lost Queen, I always say yes. Absolutely, hands down, enthusiastically do it. But then they ask me what other books it's like, and I always struggle to come up with an adequate comp because to me it's very original. However, it is often hailed as Outlander meets Camelot. And would you say that's an accurate comparison, or would you compare it differently?
It's very flattering to be compared to Outlander, that's for sure. I think Diana Gabaldon is a beautiful writer. She has such a tactile way of writing that just thrusts you right into the scene. But I think it's probably more similar to the Mists of Avalon. And a good childhood friend of mine is also a fellow author now, Linnea Hartziker. And if you've read any of her books, she wrote the Golden Wolf, and then of course the Sea Queen, and so anyway, she's incredible.
Half-Down King.
Half-Down King was her first, and the books take place in and around Norway and such. But I think my books are somewhat similar to that, to Hilary Mantel, a little bit of Philippa Gregory. Yeah, hope that's helpful in helping you further hand sell my books.
For sure, and I should have even thought of it, because on the shelves here, your books live next to Linnea's. So I actually have
school together.
They're in school together. So it's really, I mean, obviously yours are in special positions tonight. But their normal spot is actually right next to each other. So
I know, we literally played at each other's houses when we were little. So
that is awesome.
No, she's an Ithacan. Yeah, she's a fellow Ithacan. She lives in Vermont now. New Hampshire, yeah.
Very cool. Should have done it together. Oh my gosh. Okay. So plan for the third book, the two of you together, and I will just fangirl the whole time, and it'll be so much fun.
I love it.
So what would you say first sparked your interest in history?
I think, so you read we were chatting to everyone else. Sarah and I were chatting before we came on, and she was mentioning she'd read fairy tale. I was thinking about this question today because I got a sneak peek of these questions. And I think what it was that I actually believed when I was a little girl that really magical things used to exist. Even when I learned, that unicorns weren't, I said no spoilers, unicorns weren't real. Sorry, guys. And all of that stuff, I still felt like all the grown-ups were wrong and that they were real. It was just a really, really long time ago that they were real. So I started to get really interested in, well, how far do I have to go back to the time when there were unicorns? And I was pretty sure that if you follow that thread of trying to find when unicorns were real, you run into all of the other things, of course, like trolls and giants and there were usually castles around. And so I had this figured out. And then, of course, I got to be older and I realized that, well, Queen Elizabeth paid the price of a castle for a narwhal tusk. She believed in her time that unicorns were real. And I kind of fell down the rabbit hole when I was writing fairy tale with this idea of, is there actually a kernel of truth, at least a kernel of truth beneath a lot of our legends? And I think that's what, I didn't do it on purpose, but I think that's what I found in The Lost Queen. It's very similar to fairy tale in that way. In fairy tale, I'm researching, well, what are fairies? What are these nature spirits that almost every culture in the world believed in at one time or still believe in? And these books are looking at the Arthurian legend, and I'm always looking to try to find the root of that belief and to find that one kernel of truth within it.
And I'm even just thinking about, like the unicorn is still like the national animal of Scotland. Like clearly they must have existed.
Scots probably know where to find them. I wouldn't be surprised.
Oh, I'm sure. They're hiding in the Highlands somewhere up in Shetland.
I did tell my son recently that I can't help it but mess with his head because, he's so sweet and he's 5 and I just can't give him any spoilers yet. So we were walking out to the beach and he asked me if unicorns were real. And I told him that they probably existed a very long time ago because I try not to lie either. Mm-hmm. So I said they probably existed a very long time ago, but I bet when you see a white horse, their ancestor was a unicorn.
Ah, that is brilliant.
And I felt good about that answer. I felt like that was a good, entryway into how terrible this. Yeah.
It'll inspire him to, explore further, at the very least.
Incredibly betrayed and write terrible, scathing memoirs about me when he's older. With that one.
Fingers crossed he finds the actual original unicorn fossil, and then all will be redeemed. So The Lost Queen is set during a unique time period, the mid to late 1500s AD, that is quite devoid of other popular historical fiction or even a lot of readily available historical research. Why did you choose that particular time, and what did your research process look like?
So, yeah, The Lost Queen was set in the late 500s AD. It was because that's when they lived. And so in order to tell their story, I then had to learn an awful lot about a time period that's really archaeologically scant. All the houses, many of the houses were built of timber, so there's very little that remains except for post holes. And there's a lot we don't know, whether or not there was glass pane windows, because the Romans had it when they invaded Britain. They had lovely thing like indoor heating for the floors, and they had indoor plumbing, and they had all of these luxurious things. But the Scots really, what we know is that they really didn't take after the Romans. They preferred living in their same way. And after the Romans left the part of Scotland between the two walls that they had occupied, you saw a retreat and a reoccupation of the hill forts, which I think is just awesome. Like, they just wanted to go back to their ancestral halls. And I think that's when we see some things were being rebuilt out of timber, and it's kind of exciting. But yeah, so it was a lot, and we're still guessing. And so my research process is going to a lot of museums when I go over there. I do a lot of reading. I read a lot of academic papers, which maybe sounds boring to some people, but I love it. And I know all the main PhDs over in Scotland who are doing really interesting stuff, like Dr. Stephen Driscoll's one, and I love reading his papers. And there's a few other people, and going to the National Museum is always great. I go to the Early People exhibit a lot, and I always see something new. And then going to the historical sites is massively important to me, because there you get a chance to see some of first of all, the landscape, which is always really important to write about, because landscape in my novels is its own character.
It really is.
And it's because I connect so much with the land, really everywhere, but especially over there. So it's important to see the sights, and it's important to also feel the feelings. Like when I went to this one particular site in the Forgotten Kingdom, I felt a lot of really, trying not to give spoilers, I felt a lot of really strong emotions. Actually, I think I can talk about this. It was the battle site where we think the Battle of Arderith happened. And it really helped me write the prologue and all of those scenes that followed in the book. So it's been pretty crippling that I haven't been able to get over to Scotland to research the third book, because there are still a lot of new sites that I already have listed that I want to go check out. But I'm just kind of biding my time and doing as much reading as I can, and looking at the old texts again and the poems. I study those a lot. That's a good question. Yeah.
This is a kind of selfish one on my part too. I've been working on a story of a character who lived in the late 700s, and there's not a ton available about Queen Alfhild. So I've been trying to, figure out, where do I go to do my research? And so that is I didn't think about the academic papers. So selfishly, thank you.
JSTOR has a lot, jstore.org, and you can get access to them through your college. Yeah, that's a good one.
Oh, cool.
Academia.org, I think, too.
Nice. So I've also started to come to the conclusion that my favorite novels are written by people who have a background in the book world. So how did your background in publishing affect your journey to being a published author?
I think that it certainly helped in helping me find an agent for fairy tale. I was in publishing at the time. And with that book, I was actually not planning on writing that myself. I wanted to stay an editor forever. That was my one dream in my career track. But my father passed away, and I was trying to find somebody else to write the book. And I was going to sort of try to purchase it on spec, a travel log. And I thought there'd be some kooky New York City journalist who'd be into it. But I ran into this one literary agent at a cocktail hour, and she said, well, I think you should write it. And she ended up being my first literary agent, and she sold the book to Penguin. But then after that, I think writing a novel, it doesn't help you at all. Nothing helps you when you're trying to write a novel. Novels are just awful and terrible. And I don't know why we do it to ourselves again and again. It's so difficult. you had a question later on, so I'll segue into that one, which was it different writing fiction versus nonfiction, and how? And the main thing is that my imagination just wasn't tuned in enough, because I was so used to being able to sit down and say, Sarah had rectangular shaped glasses, and I'd find some clever way to describe what color they were, and then my job was done. And I could record our conversation, and they did not have a lot of dictaphones in the 6th century. It's surprising, but it's true. So you have to just tune into something else, something other, the muse. And it just sort of, what's, I guess, addictive about it is that it's such a process to sit and try and make those words come. And so that's kind of what keeps me coming back. But yeah, it didn't help me at all to have, I worked with some of the fiction writers as an editor. Writing and editing are two completely different sides of your brain. And it's helpful for me when I'm revising to have been an editor, except for that I'm my own worst critic and nothing is good enough or clever enough or any of those things. So that can be also really limiting as well. So aside from the agent thing, it sounds like it was probably, as I'm reviewing, as I'm speaking, more hampering than helpful, I think.
Well, we have 2 cool comments that came through. Jesse Roberts is happy about everything with the unicorns, which is great. We will happily talk more unicorns. And Melissa Falconfield says that she loves all that you have to say about the landscape research. So very cool. Thank you, guys.
That's nice. And I know both of those ladies from other places. Hi, guys. It's so weird not to be able to see you all. Speaking into the void. Actually just got a really beautiful note from Melissa Falconfield, who is a fellow author, by the way. She wrote All That Burns Away, a really amazing novel. And she wrote me a very sweet text about the book last night that was mind-blowingly thoughtful. So that was nice. It's always high praise when you hear nice words from someone who's a friend, but also a writer, because they don't pull any punches. Yeah. Good.
Oh, for sure. And just to circle back a little bit, I was thinking, so in having less historical, basis really and dictaphones, did you find it freeing to get to make the characters, very, very much your own? And how did you balance, like having them be your own versus true to their inspiration?
I try to stay as true to the inspiration as I can. I feel like I'm trying not to make the characters my own as much as possible. And I try to look as much as I can at the events that they experienced and how that would shape a person in general. And this is why, a lot of people have been asking, can I start with The Forgotten Kingdom? I think the books hopefully stand alone, and yes, you could, but it's so interesting to me because the events that Langoreth and Lilkin experienced when they were children are the events that turned them into sort of the radicals in a certain way that they become. Mm-hmm. And I guess we've said no spoilers, but the events that are in The Lost Queen, all of the big sort of painful events that are in that book are historical. So that's why I wrote that book, was to help share those moments. And you can see why they would make you into somebody who cared. Just like today, we're going through moments that make us care about our government again, make us stand up for what we believe in again. They were going through very similar types of times, which is why I think it's so amazing to be writing about their world now.
Been seeing so many parallel stories of what I've been reading in books and like what is going on in the world right now. So that's really cool, because I think you do a great job of making your characters just jump off the page so completely. Like you feel like you're walking down the path, through Scotland with them, and I think you bring them to life very well.
Thank you.
And then we have another comment from Marielle. Who says she wholeheartedly agrees about the fiction versus nonfiction, and novels are monsters, but we keep going back to write more.
Something addictive in all of that, for sure.
So this one ties into your social media and also my own personal experiences traipsing through Scotland. I went on a road trip, and it was amazing, and I carried The Lost Queen with me, and talking about, landscape and just how much it resonates and how well you describe it. I would take the book and take the place and try to, match words to location, which was amazing. And then in the lead up to the release of The Forgotten Kingdom, I loved your In Scotland with Signe series. So for those who aren't familiar, Signe's Instagram features a whole set of different places in Scotland and how they're featured in the books. And it is amazing. And it's wonderful. And selfishly, I'm just going to keep saying that over and over and over again because it makes me want to go there so badly. But we can't. So what would be your top 3 places for a Lost Queen and Forgotten Kingdom literary pilgrimage that we could maybe visit virtually?
This is tough because do we break it down by site or are we breaking it down by geographical location? Because some of the geographical locations have more than one site. I was thinking
your
about
choice.
Okay, so I would say definitely one place that's not to be missed is this place called Châtel Herault. And it's actually mentioned in my author's note. I talk a lot about the locations in the author's notes of both the books, so you could find these places. But Châtel Herault is in Hamilton, Scotland, and it's actually the place where I believe Langoreth and Lalacan grew up. That's Cadzow. And there's ways you can trace the name back, and it's been done. And it's sort of a well-known fact in the area anyway, but you can go to that site. There's now this beautiful 18th century hunting lodge. It's called a hunting lodge. It's this beautiful mansion that's on the site. There's an amazing staff there. They have a tea room. You can wander through all of the trails, and you can walk across the Duke's Bridge to the ruins of a medieval castle. And it's underneath those ruins that I think the original hall would have been. It's a really incredible place. And when you go there, you can still see the Cadzow white cattle that I write about in the books. They still have them there. So you're looking at the descendants of Langoreth's family's herd, essentially. That's mind blowing to me. So yeah, that would be probably number 1. And then if you're there, you might as well hop over to Glasgow and go to the necropolis and St. Mungo's Cathedral, because that's a really magical place, although it's a hill full of dead bodies. When you climb to the top, you can still imagine what it was like before it was desecrated all those centuries ago. And you can go into the crypt where Mungo's body is buried. And I definitely got the goosebumps. It could have been totally psychosomatic, but I did not like that space at all. Maybe he knew I was out for him. I don't know. He's supposed to be a saint. I would have thought he had better vibes, but so that's a neat place to go. And then definitely Dalriada, which is going to factor more even in book 3, but that's where you find Dunad, which was the Hill of Kings, where Arthur and Aidan Gabran were made into kings, taking the sword from the stone. You can still go there and see the footprint where the early medieval kings would place their foot as they stood on top of this rock and had their inaugurational ceremony in front of all of what you could imagine down in the plains below, all of the people watching. That's a really magical place, Dunad. We went there on the virtual tour, so there's pictures of that. And then I really, really love the whole area of Glen Lyon, which is in what was back then Pictland. It's in today modern day Perthshire. And Glen Lyon is this beautiful glen. It used to be called the Glen of Crooked Stones. And it is just haunted, beautiful, very, very sparsely populated. You know, you've got to have like pack food in if you're going to go explore there for the day. In case you get stuck and there's no roads, you've got to go in. You can go in a certain way, but then you're on foot. And it's just miles and miles and miles of wilderness. Incredible place. But right at the gateway of that is Fortingall, which I write about in The Forgotten Kingdom. And it was a place that I really went and visited. And they have an ancient yew tree there that's worth going to see. And lots of little hill forts throughout the area. And Loch Tay, the Crannog Center is there at Loch Tay. It's a very, very magical place. Those are my top 3.
I imagine a lot of people are like bookmarking this minute right now to go back to later and to start taking notes of where to go.
You know, it'll change in 5 minutes. I mean, there's so many amazing sites in that book, in all the books. I find cool new historical sites every time I go over there. So
there's so much to discover for such a relatively small square mileage. There's so much history to unpack, which is just so cool.
And Ireland as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I spent 2 weeks going around and visiting some medieval archaeological sites in Ireland, and I wish I could have done the same in Scotland as like a student, which would have been cool. But Robot Fist says, one more reason on a list of many to visit Scotland.
That's right.
And then Florence Acard, this is my first streaming. I really enjoyed listening to Signe last spring at an event on Isle of Palms. And thank you for doing this. She was disappointed that there were no more book signings, but hopefully we'll be able to do actual signings in the future soon. So thank you guys for those comments. My next question, which I feel like all of my questions start with very lengthy, expositions at the beginning, but that's what I do. In The Last Queen, we get the story primarily through our brave protagonist, Lygorith's first-person point of view, with glimpses into Lyokin? I'm always going to say it wrong. In my head, it's one way, but the letters, they don't match the head. So we get Lygorith and we get Lyokin, but in the Forgotten Kingdom, we get not only the two of them, but a certain special young character as well, who I personally love. And what led you to want to include a child's perspective, and how was that, any different?
I thought it would be really interesting to show, she's someone who caught my attention in the end of The Lost Queen. I found that I really was interested by, all of a sudden there was a little girl circling this tree saying creepy things, and I just thought, that's someone I'd want to get to know. Totally my type. And so I wanted to learn more about her, and she really just appeared in the narrative, standing literally on the edge of this cliff. That was the first scene that I wrote with her. And then I had to sort of go back and make her have her place. But that was the first scene, was when you get to that scene in the Forgotten Kingdom where this character is on the edge of this cliff. That was the first time she stepped into the story for me as the writer. And it was really powerful. So I think it just sort of happened. And the same with Lygorith. I hadn't necessarily meant to write a child, but I knew that the events that were happening to her were happening when she was at a younger age. So I had to show some of her youth, and so that you could understand what her history was and why she had these traumatic events happen when she was a little girl, and how that would make her make different decisions as a woman. So yes, but it was interesting. And I think that's why I didn't write that younger character in first person, because when you write from a first person point of view with a character that age, it becomes difficult to spend a lot of time in that voice. Whereas if you can become a bit more elevated, then you can show more, you can show some more sophistication. You're not as locked in on that first person POV.
And I like too how you do it. It just flows so smoothly, in between all of the different characters. It's beautiful. It's just beautiful.
I felt like I was asking a lot of my fellow writer friends. We have this sort of little tribe, and I was saying, is it okay? Can I do this? Can I really? And I think the answer is, I sort of knew the answer already, which is, if you can make it feel natural, then yes, you can do it. You can do anything as long as it doesn't stick out and it doesn't feel unnatural and inorganic. So I'm glad you said that. That's good to know, because I felt like it worked. I was hoping it did.
Well, and she quickly becomes a favorite character. I know, not just of myself, but some of my friends as well were like, I love her. She's wonderful. So for everyone who doesn't want a spoiler, I won't say anything more about her other than you have to read The Forgotten Kingdom and find out, just who it is that we're talking about. Which leads very well into my next question of, there are just so many characters that you've created that I adore, and I find myself often longing for new interactions between particular characters. Is there a relationship in the series that you enjoyed writing the most?
I think because my head is more in the Forgotten Kingdom now, the relationship that I really enjoyed writing from that book was the relationship between Diarmid, who is a wisdom keeper, and anyone around him. I just think I absolutely love him as a character. There's something of my father in him, I think. He reminds me a little bit of my dad in certain ways. Looks a little bit like my dad did. But he is just constantly surprising me with the things that he says. And he's tough, but he's funny. He's a very dry sense of humor, and I just really enjoy him. Yeah, and then I think too, there are some exciting relationships that I'm thinking about that we need to see revisited in book 3. So that should be fun.
I am so excited. I'm so excited for book 3. Like, need it yesterday, but I know that's not a possibility. If you were to pick
my stomach now, I think I need a drink.
No, I will wait. Winds of Winter length waiting time for the 3rd book. I hope it's not that, but
okay,
I will. No rush. I'll just keep rereading The Lost Queen, The Forgotten Kingdom, so I don't forget.
And I think hopefully there will be some really cool new books out by other writers that want to write about the early historic period. That's kind of my wish, you know. I do not own this time period, and I wish that more people would write about it. And it would be fantastic if people find that I'm completely wrong about certain archaeological things, because it means that we're learning more than we know now. So,
absolutely,
yes.
So we actually have a comment from my friend Stucca, who I gave your books to, and said that you're quickly becoming one of her favorite authors, and that they love you so much.
Oh, thank you. That's nice to hear. My publisher will be glad to hear that too. They've been working awfully hard.
Okay. So sorry, scrolling through my questions. Where are we? If you were to pick a character in your books to be your best friend, who would it be?
Cathan. Hands down. I love Cathan. He's like the grandfather that I never had in life, you know? And I kind of have always made friendships with people generations older than myself. So yeah, Cathan would be one. I would really obviously like to be friends with Langorith and Ariane, who doesn't want to be friends, although she's so hot and cold. You know, you never know what you're going to get with. I don't think she's really a big socializer, so that might not be fun. She's not the friend. She's not going to be your wing woman necessarily. Like, she'll set you up with the guy from behind the scenes. She'll give you the talisman and everything, but she's not going to hang around and, you know, say witty things. But that's kind of why I love her too. I don't know. I feel so close to all of these characters. I feel like, to me, they are living people. Which is can be kind of kooky feeling, but it's neat, and I wouldn't trade it. It's a very bizarre profession, but I do want to be best friends. I mean, obviously, there's of course the people I do not want to be best friends with, and I think we all know who they are. So, no names need to be mentioned.
No, there's definitely ones where I had an old book journal that had like characters you'd want to be best friends with, and then characters that you would not get along with at all, which I thought was actually surprisingly different from those who would be your mortal enemies.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, maybe characters too similar to me I wouldn't actually get along with. Made me think about it differently.
You know, there's some really, there's some elements that I struggled with, violence and some of the other really difficult elements that I was writing into the Forgotten Kingdom. And I did stop and think, should I not do this? You know, I think that it's so easy, especially with a television show potentially in the works based on all of this. It would be so easy to make it into another one of those types of programs that is just so unrelentingly dark. And of course, there are those scenes that were so difficult with Ramsay Snow and in Game of Thrones that still haunt me and stayed with me. And of course, some of the choices that were made with the production of Outlander as well. And what I came to was the fact that I think this is what the story, first of all, and not to sort of cast off the responsibility, but the groundwork had already been laid in the first book for the plot developments that happen in book 2. And I felt that was for a reason, although I didn't quite understand what the reason was at the time. And then as I was writing through it, what I really realized is that I think the types of sicknesses that we deal with today in a society were just as prevalent in the 6th century. And I think it's not that I'm trying to create a two-dimensional villainistic type of character. It's that there were very likely men that had power that were incredibly spiritually corrupt and were into all sorts of things that were reprehensible and made them really terrible human beings. That's not any different from today. And choosing to shine a spotlight on it or not was really the question. And I hope that it's ultimately something that I can make redemptive in the end, with how the women who are on the other end of that come through. And I really wanted to show feminine strength, and that was my focus of it. So
many, such good words. That's like how my brain is with words right now. I can't come up with any because I'm in awe. I feel like you do that, so very well. No one is black and white. There's a whole lot of gray in between, and just, it's great. So Drew actually has a question. I'll jump that one in. When you're working to create a real world answer to the questions behind the myth, I would imagine that there is a ton of stuff that doesn't get added to the book when you're doing the research. What are some of your favorite ridiculous things that you found in the research that didn't make it into the book, and why did they get cut?
Well, to me, it's little things like, did you know that they had tweezers in the 6th century?
What?
Yes, and they had padlocks as well. We found a padlock over in an old Pictish site in the north of, I think, Rhynie, that area. Sorry, I'm adjusting my seat. And so it's things like that. It's usually, for me, it's the artifacts. It's all that dumb knowledge that you accumulate that you just cannot vomit onto the page because it becomes too obvious. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff. And then too, as far as Drew's question pertaining to the mythical aspects, there's a lot of ridiculous stuff in the myths that was added later on by, starting with Geoffrey of Monmouth and then going on to Sir Thomas Malory. Like, everybody they had no qualms about just saying, adding and making things up. And they're like, this is a great story, but because I can't write my own, I'm just going to take this story and just mangle it and make it really difficult for some 21st century writer to make any sense of it whatsoever, who actually wants to know if there was any truth beneath the legend. That was their intent, I'm pretty sure. But so those types of a-holes I've got a problem with. I don't think that, but I think too, they did preserve, like, if it wasn't for Geoffrey of Monmouth and Thomas Malory, the stories wouldn't have been preserved at all. So, there's two sides to that coin, and I'm appreciative of that. But so there's just a lot of nonsense. And I hate to say this, but I think that nonsense is kind of spewed out in that new Netflix show, Cursed. Like, I can't stand it. I tried to watch it several times because I was writing an article and I wanted to be able to write about this show and whether or not I thought it was, I couldn't watch it. It just made me feel nauseated. I just couldn't. So, that kind of stuff gets frustrating when I'm trying to do my best to bring real human beings back to the surface and everyone's like, no, we want more magic and it's just very discouraging. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's always, I loved, the story of Merlin and Sword in the Stone and everything growing up. And then, I was just really excited for the real history when I saw that was, the inspiration. Well, Langoreth being the inspiration, but how it, tied to the two of them. And just, there were really great women whose stories aren't told and just erased, and usually for the sake of the narrative, because at the time people didn't think they were important. So on so many levels.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because Langoreth was coming out of a time generationally when, probably 400 or 600 years before her lifetime, there were still female queens. And even into probably the 1st and 2nd century AD, there were still female queens. And so it's interesting that she, with a country that's so close, people who are so close to their oral tradition, she would have heard of these women. And yet I do get the sense, as far as I could tell, for some reason by the 6th century, it was almost like after the Romans came in and tried to conquer and did conquer so much of southern Britain, and even had their sights set on Ireland, it was sort of like the men said, all right, well, this is all good and well enough, but we're going to take it from here. Even in the sort of pre-Christian realm of things. Although the women were still very present in the mythological cycles and in the gods and goddesses and that sort of world, I think that there was definitely a shift. But I just think that goes to show what happens during times of, really, really great trauma. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what that time period was a huge scar. We still talk about the Civil War and we still talk about slavery, here. We still, and the horrible effects of slavery. And that's, far nearer than what was happening during Lengora's time with the fall of the Roman Empire. But this was a situation where people remembered their history via oral tradition, and that was to them just yesterday. Mm-hmm. That their ancestors were forced down from the hill forts, were raped, were murdered, that the fields were sown with salt, all the terrible things that happened. There's one hill fort in the borders, kind of near the borders, which was used basically as a target practice for Roman artillery. And they now think I think it's called Bullswork is the name of the fort. And they now think that when that happened, it was occupied. But that was the first show of Roman militaristic might, was to completely annihilate this hill fort at the entryway of the land of the Britons.
Oh my gosh.
Cool. So that's what I had one reader sometimes read my reviews on Goodreads, and it's good and it's bad. I try not to, but I sometimes do. And I had this one reader say, she had a bone to pick because I write about the world of Rome and the Roman invasion as if it were yesterday. And it's because I believe to them it really was.
Yeah. So. Oh, for sure. So we have a couple questions that came in from the chat. Robot Fist wants to know, do you have a Lost Queen music playlist?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm super weird about sharing my music stuff. One of my friends is in marketing and she's kind of brilliant. She said, don't you think people would want to know what you listen to? And I don't know, I'm super, super private about it because it's so, the music is so personal to my own emotional landscape. But I will say that before I write, I listen to a lot of Sigur Rós, and not the really crazy instrumental stuff that gets really heavy and metally, but I have to sort of meditate before I write. And so I listen to a lot of Sigur Rós to do that. I'm a big fan of theirs. But yeah, no, and mostly too, because there's songs I'll hear that are contemporary every now and again that will remind me of them, of Lalakin and Lingworth. So that might be interesting for people. I'll have to think about it. But mostly I don't have much related to the Lost Queen because I can't listen to music while I write.
Okay.
I'm utterly silent. Otherwise I lose my mind. Yeah, I can't concentrate. It's a great question. Yeah.
Oh, I need instrumental. I need something, but no words. I can't do words and come up with anything. I start writing what I'm hearing and no.
I can't even do instrumental. I can't do the pinging of a guitar will make me really aggravated. I just can't. It's got to be silent. Sometimes I'll put earplugs in. Yeah.
Dion Santiago says, I love the story of the feathers, 2 for your lovers, 3 for your child, etc. Is this from Scottish folklore?
It's actually not. That's an amazing question. That is just another one of those really bizarre, creepy things that comes in when I'm writing. There are some characters who just say things, and that was just one of the things that Lingora said, and I just heard her saying it. They're sort of in my mind as I was writing it, and I thought it was really, really beautiful. But I will say, too, that if there's a book called Carmina Gadelica, which has a lot to do with bird lore, and it's from the 1800s. This minister, Alexander Carmichael, went to the Highlands and wrote down a lot of old prayers and songs for healing and curses and all sorts of amazing things. And it's collected in a folkloric book that you can purchase today anywhere and get it from your local indie store, please. So there's a lot of bird lore and feather, that sort of world in that book. So I drew on that for the Forgotten Kingdom for sure. I think that they used to make pretty cool bird sounds. Yeah, pretty fascinating.
Very cool. And then Jesse Roberts wants to know, are you being sought as a reference to others as a result of your years of research into?
And Jesse's been popping in all week at different events, which is really fun. She is a fellow, she's in upstate New York, I think. Yeah, Buffalo maybe. No, I'm not. And that's fine with me because I'm super busy. We can just, and also, I don't have a degree in all of this. Can we talk about that for a minute? I'm a former book editor. I studied communication. I do not have a history degree as much as I wish that I did. I might someday have time to go back to school and get that, or maybe archaeology, who knows? But no, I'm just sort of a layman. And so I don't think that I'm considered an expert. And I would probably refer whatever person was looking for information to people like, Dr. Stephen Driscoll and people like Tim Clarkson and all those guys. And women. There's some women too. Alice Blackwell. Yeah.
Very cool. So this is going to be my pitch to everyone of I have just a few questions left. So if you want to put those questions into the chat, so we can make sure that we get those asked of Signe before we go, please do it now. Okay, so returning to characters, and I know you said Langorith is obviously very, very special. Would she be the character that you would say you most identify with, or would there be another one?
That's an interesting question. Who do I identify most with? I don't really put myself into these books in that way. So that's a really interesting question. I think that I identify with her most because she's like me, a mother. But I think that if she and I were sitting next to each other right now at a table, she would have such a very different perspective on life. She was someone who bore 4 children and was nobility and all of this stuff that she was. So yeah, I don't know. And I think there's parts of me that identify with Lilacan and his pain and his quest for connection and short temper, which I sometimes have about things. So yeah, maybe there's little pieces that I identify with in a lot of the different characters, except for the nasty ones, obviously. That's a great question.
Cool. So given the view of Rome as the invader, which they are, it would make sense to not go with the, Arthur as a Roman story, which has been done, in Hollywood and all that kind of stuff. In your opinion, as a researcher, how would you rate the, actual Camelot and the Round Table and the knights and stuff as far as, totally made up to... Yeah, okay, I could see, maybe a little bit of realness, but really not much.
I think that a really good friend of mine, the author Adam Ardrey, has an excellent couple of books exactly about this. Finding Arthur talks about, and that was where I started before with both of these books. I started with Adam's work and then did my own lots and lots of research off of that. And Adam and I sometimes talk and sometimes I wouldn't say we've argued, but we have different perspectives on things now. And one of the things is that obviously the whole idea of chivalry and all of that, that's all from Thomas Mallory. So that was all just planted in sort of Knights of the Round Table and every sort of Arthurian depiction you get when people are wearing corsets and medieval sleeves. That's all just garbage. But I think the real roots are really fascinating, and there's a suggestion of, the idea that Arthur was fostered, because back then, Langorith and Lilacan, of course, fostered Gwenthilai. So fostering was a really common system. So he's a foster brother to Kay, and the character of Kay shows up in my books as well, but in a different incarnation, and someone who I'm hoping we're going to meet more in book 3 as well. So those things are true. Round Table, there's been some interesting discoveries around the area of Stirling, that there's a circular mound, and a lot of these hills were called Moot Hills, and they still are called Moot meeting place, where games were conducted on the quarter year festivals, or judiciary things were decided by the chieftain or the petty king or the jurists who were there. So there could have been an idea of that. And I think Adam writes really well about that whole round table in his book, Finding Arthur, which I recommend.
Well, that one was from Drew, so I was like, oh, we should ask that one.
I think Drew would really dig these. That I think that he'll maybe go into a bit of a rabbit hole with the Lost Queen, because then you have to read Finding Merlin, and then you've got to read The Forgotten Kingdom and Finding Arthur. So
I'll make sure he does.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to push for any news on the third book. I'm not. I promised I wouldn't. But what's up next? Are you planning your next trip to Scotland when hopefully you can take it? Are you working on anything else? Articles? Interesting? What's up next?
I am, it's a very serious business writing books now. And I've been really fortunate in that I have a really incredible editor, Trish Todd, and she has been an amazing partner for me in these books, because she's sort of like, well, let's see if you can write a book a year. Well, that couldn't happen. So we're like, now we can maybe do a book every 2 years. And I send her my first 100 pages, and she says nice things and points out things I need to change. And so we've got a good dynamic. I'm starting to come around to getting back into the research aspect, which my mother, Linda, who is sort of my sounding board for all things, always reminds me that that's when I get excited about the stories, when I start the research. So for right now, I'm still kind of dragging my heels, but I'm supposed to start drafting and researching starting October. Because although book 3 will go on sale September of 2023, which is 3 years away, it'll take me 24 months just to write it. And then that gives Atria a year to put it through copy editing and fact check. We can fact check and do all the stuff that we had to sort of rush through because I was so late delivering the book. And they did an amazing job. I mean, I feel as solid as I can about my flora and the fauna in this book and all of the fact checking stuff. And the map is beautiful. And I had to do a lot of work on the map as well. So that all takes a lot of time. It takes at least a year to be able to produce the book. That's why it's 2023. But I am starting to get curious about some things I've discovered and things that have stuck in my mind from texts that I put down as I was finishing book 2. And I left myself a huge list of things just to kind of revisit or to, make sure that I touched on in book 3. So I'm ready-ish. I just need like a little more vacation and then I'll be ready to go.
Understandable. I do actually have a history degree myself, and so the research was my favorite part of everything was just being able to dive into researching things. So I can very much relate to just how exciting it is. And I have friends who say, "Oh, it's so boring, it's research." I'm like, no, that's when you learn all the fascinating stuff.
That's when you think, how does nobody know about this? And if nobody knows about this, that's insane. Everyone needs to know. So therefore, if someone else is writing about it, someone's got to.
Yeah, though mine focuses in early American history and the foundation of our political system. And so I definitely lately have been like, how does no one know? But that is a
sounds like
topic
we
for a
write
whole
some
nother day.
all of us, Sarah.
But back to the fun stuff. What was the last book that gave you a book hangover?
So I read The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, which my good friend Megan Gentry recommended. And I think my sister had just read it as well. And I'm big on word of mouth. I totally believer in that. And it had been out for a while. It's a fantasy, but it does feel Game of Thronesy, except for that he takes his time, and not so much like George R.R. Martin, who we've got so much happening and so much conversation. It's a man telling a story, and it's a slow burn, but it's beautifully written. The world building is incredible, and it takes place in sort of a Game of Thronesy kind of world. I'm sure a lot of people know about Patrick Rothfuss. I'm talking about him like, have you guys heard of this guy? Because I hadn't. I'm an idiot, and I'm really under a rock. He's an amazing writer. So I finished that book, and that was one of the books that I had really strong feelings about. My editor side came out, and I was like, why were there 3 chapters about a dragon? What's the point? So I have the second book, and I'm sort of waiting to dive in, because like if those things don't make sense for me in book 2, I'm going to be really upset. I have strong opinions. So that I would say was a bit of a book hangover, and not as much happened as I thought was going to happen, but still it was such a beautiful story that I couldn't be angry about that. It was just a beautiful story, and people just need to be patient, like myself. I have to just be more patient. Yeah.
As we all patiently await the third book of that one as well.
I appreciate everyone's patience, because I think there are some of my writing friends who have published far more titles than I ever will, who have in the past gotten stuck on this hamster wheel, and I've seen that it can be really detrimental. I've seen them wreck their bodies. I've seen them develop health problems. And I came really close to that with The Forgotten Kingdom, and it wasn't anyone's fault but my own. It was just, it's really difficult to produce a book in a certain amount of time. And I had personal stuff going on. And so it was really difficult. And I just realized that I don't ever want to feel pressured. I think the reason some of these authors go into that harmful zone, is because we are told as authors by the world that readers have a short attention span, and that readers are going to forget about you, and they're going to forget about your writing and move on to the next, and you're going to lose your audience. And I just sort of refused to believe that ever since Fairy Tale. I wrote Fairy Tale 11 years ago. And there are still people who are finding that book today, even though it's kind of half out of print. And it's, and there were people on my Facebook page who had hung around for a decade or a little more close to a decade while I tried to figure out what I was going to do next. So I tend to have more faith in my readers than that. And I think it's a shame that, the types of readers who go on Goodreads and say, I refuse to read a trilogy till all 3 books are done. That's a shame, and they're sort of perpetuating this unhealthy cycle, that I'm not making television, binge-worthy television. I think that books are a much more old-fashioned, beautiful type of artistry to do, and that takes time. So I appreciate that.
And I don't think I could come up with anything to follow that at all. So I don't think we have any more questions. But I do want to do, a little quick pitch. We have beautiful hardcovers of The Forgotten Kingdom at the store, which come with signed book plates. And bear with me. Beautiful bookmarks, as well as your choice. And I am going to butcher his name because I call him Ridark in my head. Which, Signe, if you could please correct me. Ruthark. Team Ruthark or Team Malgwyn? Malgwyn. Yep. Stickers for you to choose from. Of course, there is only one right answer, but I will tell you that the right answer we are already running out of. So if you want the right one, ask it quickly of us at the store. And then I have been told that we can still get copies of Fairy Tale. So even though the website is back ordered, we can still get them. And then also, if you haven't even started the series yet, The Lost Queen is also in stock. So that is my pitch for Signe's Books from Town Book Center. And thank you guys all so much for tuning in. And Signe, is there anything else you want to add?
No, I just want to thank everybody for tuning in, and some people have tuned in multiple times, which I think is what is so rad about doing a virtual tour. And I just want to thank everybody for their questions and for, good ratings on Goodreads are so helpful, and spreading the word on the books is really, really helpful, because that is what enables writers to keep writing, is all of you. We can only put out a book. Like, you guys are the ones that really make the magic. So I really appreciate everybody's support and love that they've been showing for me and these novels.
Oh, do we have one more? I'm waiting for Drew to type. Please forgive me. Oh, you are awesome.
Oh, that's nice.
You are awesome.
What will I do when tour's over and there's no one to tell me I'm awesome anymore, guys? It's so sad. Thank you.
Thank you all so much.
All right. Good night, everybody.